Hatred stirs up strife. Love covers all sins. Nature's pretty neat, don't you think? There's a lot of really interesting things about nature. You go and you stare at the heavens at night and you see the incredible expanse of space and you think, wow, nature is really incredible. Or you take a little bit of water and you put it on a slide and you stick it under a microscope and you see the microscopic organisms that live in our water or in other things. And you go, nature is really neat. This time of year, deer are active. It's that time of year you see them all over the road where they get hit by cars, dead carcasses littering the highway. The deer are active this time of year, and there's a video that I saw from earlier this month in Michigan. There was a hunter who came across two male deer that were in a fight. They're fighting for supremacy. They're fighting for some sort of mating rights with the doe in the area or whatever or however that works. But those deer were in a fight to the death. And it was such a violent struggle that the hunter and his friends that were around were actually afraid that both deer would die from the hunt. Their horns had become locked together. And in the middle of all of that, they decided they had to do something. And the deer were not only fighting, but they were also afraid of the people who were starting to kind of close in on them. And so they had moved away from where they started, and they ended up in water. And now they were in water, and the deer were tangled together, and they were fighting and scrapping and biting and anything they could do because it was just a violent death struggle. And the hunters were very, very afraid for these deer. And so they decided the only way to loose the deer was to get a tree trimmer, an electric or gas-powered tree trimmer that one of them had in his truck. He brought it back. It's on a long pole. It has this kind of blade that oscillates at the end. And he had this tree trimmer, and you can watch on the video. Another hunter is videoing this whole thing as these deer are violently struggling. He's holding that tree trimmer out, trying to get in between them just enough to lop off a little bit of antler so that it'll free the deer from each other. And it was just incredible to watch these deer struggling, and the hunter, one of them flips over on his back, and he's in the water, and he's upside down, and the other deer, they both are very frightened. They're both struggling to kill the other, really. And in the middle of all that, the hunter finally gets into the water, he moves over, and you can see him lean way out forward, and he just lops off a little bit of antler, and the two deer are freed, and they just run in separate directions. They just get out of there, both afraid of the hunters. And that hunter said one of his greatest prizes now is that little piece of antler that he has that flew off the deer when he saved those two deer from killing each other. You think about two deer battling it out for supremacy, and it's kind of interesting. That's nature, maybe in its more violent form. I was thinking that that's probably as close as we can get to the kind of nature you have on the African savanna, but that's not what we want in our homes. We don't want two people battling it out for supremacy in the home. We don't want a death struggle. We certainly don't want it physically. We don't want it emotionally or verbally or spiritually. That kind of struggle, that kind of violent fight is really what we don't want when we talk about wisdom in the Christian home. But unfortunately, some Christian homes are filled with anger and even hatred. Sometimes the problem is among siblings. When Becky and I were first starting off in ministry, I was a youth and music pastor at a little church in Pennsylvania. This church was on the top of a mountain. We lived at the bottom of the mountain, and if it was raining, we got up in the morning, it was raining. Often, by the time I got to the top of the mountain, the skies were clear up there. The clouds were below the top of the mountain. It was interesting to live in that environment. It was central Pennsylvania, not far from Penn State University, and so we had a lot of snow, a lot of cold, things I wasn't really used to growing up in the South. But we survived there about 18 months until we left and went to another ministry. But during that time, we met two girls, Bethany and what was her sister's name? I can't remember. Bethany and Stephanie and Bethany, Stephanie and Jennifer. It was either Jennifer or Stephanie, and I'll probably think of some completely different name. But these two sisters hated each other. They hated each other. And I didn't realize how much they hated each other, even though they told me over and over again, I hate my sister. And they would just say it like that, I hate my sister. And they said it so plainly, I thought, well, of course you do. She's your sister, ha, ha, ha. We all kind of laughed about it, but she was being serious. And Bethany, which was the younger one, was more verbal about it. She would just say of her older sister, I hate her. I don't love her at all. I hate her. I wish she was dead. I hate my sister. And Bethany was actually, if you said behavior-wise, how were the girls? She was the better of the two. And so I just let it go. She hates her sister. I don't believe her. I don't think she hates her sister. I was talking to her parents a little bit later, sometime months after being there, and they said, oh yeah, our girls don't get along. I think they hate each other. And I thought, this is strange. This is weird. I've just never seen anything like it. It's like the 8 inches of snow you get every weekend living here in central Pennsylvania. It's just weird. I don't understand this. But they were constantly affirming to me that neither liked the other very much. And Bethany told me right up front, right before we left, she said, someday when my sister moves out, she will leave and I will never speak to her ever again. That's my plan. I hate my sister. And I remember thinking, this is the very first time I met a truly dysfunctional family, where the dysfunction was located not so much in the parents. They, by all accounts, loved each other and got along great. It was between the siblings, between the children growing up in the home. Now, I started this series on the Christian home, looking at the book of Proverbs and saying, what is God's wisdom for our home? And I started with 4 very philosophical messages dealing with wisdom. What is wisdom? Why is it important for our home? And how does it interplay with the family? And they were so philosophical that one night going home from church, my wife said, at some point, I hope you'll get to the practical stuff. It was just really philosophical. And I labeled at least in my notes, the first 4 sermons as a blueprint. I was kind of thinking like an architect building a house. This is the blueprint. And it's just all kind of philosophical. I'm looking at how God would build up a Christian home and wisdom in the family. And then after the blueprint stage, I got to a series of assessment tools. And I've been working through some assessment tools to help you try to determine, is my home really a home where there's wisdom, or is my home something else? And so those assessment tools were things like, are we listening to one another? Are we being honest with each other? And the final assessment tool I want to introduce to you tonight is, do we love each other? You can actually determine in your home if there really is wisdom, God's wisdom in your home, by those 3 tools. You could ask that question. And if you're seriously asking you the question, you will come to an answer that I hope will reveal to you whether or not your home is on the right track, going the right direction, or there's work that needs to be done in your home. And so as you look at those 3 questions, are we listening to each other? Are we being honest with each other? Is there love in our home? You can really pull out of your family what is really going on, what's really there. And so this final assessment is to help you think through whether your home's on the right track or whether you need to do some work. So let's begin with this verse, Proverbs chapter 10 and verse 12. Hatred stirs up strife. Number 1, conflict thrives where there is a lack of true love. Relationships can struggle with discord. Now, the idea that Solomon is referring to here is contention. He's talking about there being division between 2 sides. I want you to think of a sport competition, or really any kind of competition, but particularly sports. You generally have 2 teams. It's unusual to have more than 2 teams in the same competition. Sometimes in individual competitions like golf or tennis, you might have more than one player playing. With golf particularly, everybody's playing together against the course. seeing who gets the better score. But when you have teams, you generally have one team playing against another team, and there's competition, and there's a natural division that's taking place. There's a natural, almost dislike. Even if some of the players are friendly to each other, there's just a natural division between the two teams. I'm not, if I'm on one team, overly interested if the other team does well, right? I mean, that's how you're thinking. I want to win. I want to come out ahead. As my soccer coach used to say, do you know what the key to winning soccer is? Score more goals than the other team. That's how you win. It's actually that simple. Score more goals. And when I was growing up, and I played a lot of soccer growing up, it was always about scoring more goals than the other team. And sometimes that led to conflict with the other players. When I was a freshman in college, I was just out of the Marine Corps, just come out of boot camp. And so you can imagine going from that environment, going to a Christian college environment. And one of the first games that our team played, I was playing a defensive position in the back. And one of the other players came down, and he was pushing and shoving. And he was pushing and shoving a lot. And a couple of times the ball was around us, he started just flailing at it with his legs, and he kept kicking me. And I just had enough of it. So the ball came down at one point, and I just, instead of playing the ball at all, I just grabbed him and threw him to the ground. I just tackled him. And it was such a surprise for the referees. They didn't know what to do. They were professors at the college. They weren't used to players just tackling other players. And so they just kind of looked at me, and they looked at him. And for a while, we were kind of rolling around on the ground. And I was definitely getting the upper hand. Now, I say all that to say, you know our missionary, the Huffstettlers, it was his brother. So every time he comes, sometimes when he's here, that story comes up, that I got in a fight with his brother on the soccer field. Well, there's division that takes place. A couple of weeks ago, I was watching a game on television between the Steelers and the Browns, Cleveland and Pittsburgh, and the one player took the helmet off another player, you may have seen this, and hit the quarterback over the head with his own helmet. And the NFL says, that's not part of our game. And I was thinking to myself, if this were hockey, nobody would care. Who would care? This is what they do. You throw down your sticks, you start punching each other. It's division. There's competing goals. I want to beat you. There's competing hopes. I want to do better than you. And in a relationship, that contention can be real. Division necessitates that there's more than one person involved. You really can't divide yourself, right? So it's you. If there's division, if there's strife, it has to be strife between you and another person. So when he says here, hatred stirs up strifes, the whole idea is that there's conflict in a relationship. By the way, the Old Testament poets use this word, strife, to talk about problems in relationships. In Psalm 80, verse 6, it talks about strife among neighbors. In Proverbs 16:28, strife separates friendships. In Proverbs 21, verse 19, there's the brawling, the striving wife. And it says, I'd rather live in a shack than in a big house with an angry wife. And then in Proverbs 20, it's a different verse, but I've got the same reference here. I think it's chapter 29. There's the contentious and angry woman. But the point is, there's this strife, and strife is between people. It's in relationships. And in your home, there can be contention. And what produces that contention, what produces that division, Solomon says, is rejection of the other person. The word hatred carries with it the idea of rejecting someone. The root word for hatred can mean to turn against another person. Like in Deuteronomy 22 and verse 13, where it talks about a man turning against his wife. That's real hatred. A man hating his wife, he's turning against her. Or the same idea is in Deuteronomy 24. It's again a man turning against his wife, but this time it's saying he is divorcing her. He's setting her away. He's putting her off. So he's rejecting her. It's the idea of actually saying, I don't want you in my life anymore. That idea of turning against somebody, that idea of rejection, Deuteronomy 1, verse 27, the people complained. that God had led them into the wilderness. He had rejected them because he hated them. That's what they were complaining. They said, God, you hate us so much. You brought us into this wilderness. We're going to die here. You have rejected us. You have hated us. Or in Psalm 139 and verse 22, the psalmist refers to enemies which he hates with a perfect hatred. He rejects everything to do with that person. So what produces the contention, what actually produces the strife, the division in the home, is one person is looking at another person and saying, I reject you. I hate you. I want nothing to do with you ever again. It's like the two girls in my youth group saying, I can't wait for the one to move out of the house, so I will never have to speak to her ever again. There's a complete and total rejection of one person for another person. And this kind of feeling results in negativity being aroused. The hatred stirs up the discord. It stirs it up. It brings it to life. It brings it out of a slumber to being awake. In fact, the word stirring here is a synonym for somebody awakening from sleep. It's used that way in Judges 5:12, where the judge Deborah is called to so she can defend Israel. Or the psalmist asks God in Psalm 44 to awaken and defend Israel. When you stir up strife, you're bringing it out of a slumber so that it's now awake. Hatred, rejecting of another person, awakens the divisions that are in a family, that are in relationships. It's the idea of becoming alert or being roused to action. And in fact, the way the verb is written here in this verse, hatred stirs up strife. It's in the intensive form. It's violent. It agitates it to a boil. It brings it into an angry boil. The verb translated stir is often used in a military sense. And doesn't that kind of fit with what we're talking about? I mean, military armies don't generally say, hey, over there, I really love you. But could you just stand up a bit so I have a better shot? There's just not that love relationship between armies. This idea of stirring to action is used in a violent way. Or Isaiah 13, God says the Medes would be stirred up to war against the Babylonians. Or in Jeremiah 25, the prophet talks about a great storm being stirred up on the earth, referring to military conflict. The hatred brings to a life, it brings to something that was asleep to being awakened, violently so it can be strife and division and separation and contention. By the way, that whole idea of being stirred to action in a violent sense is also used in the sense of love, being stirred up in a person's heart. Love can be kind of violent too, in a positive way, I guess. But the Song of Solomon uses this word 6 different times. In chapter 2 and verse 7 and chapter 3 and verse 5, it uses it the same way. Don't stir up love before it's time, before the right time. It's counseling people, especially young people, to be careful about falling in love too early. And when you think about this whole idea of violence, this whole idea of something being aroused passionately to action, you get that sense of a military, you get that sense of love. Both of those give you the idea of how powerful this is. Hatred stirs strife. Hatred brings out in a relationship a division that is sometimes impossible to ever be mended. This is what it does. And if there is a rejection of any person in your family, you are bringing into your home the opportunity for there to be strife, for there to be division in your family. And there it is. I can tell you that there are a lot of Christian homes that are going through this very thing right now. And they're going through this thing because mom and dad can't get along, or because parents can't get along with children, or children can't get along with parents. Or the problem is that the children can't get along with each other, and sometimes it's grandparents involved. A few years ago, a really horrible, humanly speaking, obviously ordained by God, but a horrible situation took place where a young man and his wife were both killed in a traffic accident. He was a pastor, a young pastor. His father was a pastor. The wife's dad was in a professional of some sort, a very wealthy man, from what I understand. And they both died in the traffic accident, but their child lived. And it was a little tiny child. And from that point forward, all it was strife between the sets of grandparents over who was going to adopt this child. And it was just absolutely terrible, to the point where they actually went to court. And you had in a courtroom, you had a judge, you have trying to decide, you have attorneys, and you have one pastor sitting in the courtroom, and you have another pastor who is on the other side. And these are men who know each other very well and have fellowship together many times, and they're on opposite ends of a courtroom because they're at strife over where this child is going to live and where he's going to grow up. And I think about what I'm talking about here, and that's exactly what this verse is referring to. There was, within the home, within the family, there was division, and that conflict brought it all out. And then all of a sudden, it got so far that it ended up going to court. And lawyers had to be paid, and a judge had to be consulted. And the judge, from what I remember hearing from others, was not very friendly. By the way, what's interesting is I knew people on both sides of that situation. And I heard the one side, and I was thinking, oh, that other person, how terrible he is, until I heard the other side. And then I went, well, I'm not so sure anymore. There's always two sides to a story, and that's what was going on there. Just as conflict thrives where there's hatred, then can we flip that over? Harmony exists where there's love. There is familiar, this is number two, there is familial harmony where love thrives. Do you see? Love covers all sins. Can I read this to you literally how it reads from the Hebrew? Over all sins covers love. It just smooths it over. The emphasis is in the proverb on the importance of love in human relationships. And the Hebrew word here is used for God's love for Israel. Like in 1 Kings chapter 10 and verse 9, the Jehovah loved Israel. Or in Hosea chapter 3, that Jehovah loves his people. This is the word here. This love that he's talking about is God's own love for his people. But it's interesting, it's also used for human relationships. When you look at the story of Jonathan and David, this is the word that the writer is using to talk about their love for one another. A love between true friends. In 1 Samuel 18, you have Jonathan and David. Jonathan is the son of Saul, the king that God has rejected. David is the king who is after God's own heart, who would replace Saul. Saul is angry with Jonathan because Jonathan doesn't care that David will replace Saul as king, that Jonathan would not be king. But Jonathan, it says, loved David, and David loved Jonathan as David loved his own soul. He loved him that much. He had a love for Jonathan that when Jonathan died, you remember Saul and Jonathan, after the story of the witch of Endor, they go up into Gilboa and they die there. They're killed by the Philistines. Their bodies are put on the wall, and the men go up and take the bodies down and bury them, and everybody mourns for Saul. And then an Amalekite comes and says, I killed Saul for you, to David, thinking David would be happy about it. And David has the man killed for killing Saul. And then he begins to mourn, and he mourns for Saul. It says all Israel mourned for Saul, but it says David mourned for Jonathan. David loved his friend. He had a real heart, a real emotional bond to this man. In fact, I will tell you, it is so offensive to read what modern liberals have tried to do with David and Jonathan's love for one another. It was a godly love that they had. And they have tried to pervert it and twist it and make it into something filthy and dirty and sexual and sinful, and it is not at all. This is real love. This is God's love. And God had a love, and people have love. And do you know what that love does? Look at the text again. What does love do? It says it covers over the failings of another. It overlooks them. The word cover is in the verbal stem, which means to conceal or to clothe, which really has the idea of hiding something. And it's in the intensive form again. So just like the flood. What happened at the flood, right? You got Noah there. He's got his boat. There's the flood. What does the water do? The water covers the whole earth. Just like the water covered the earth, so love covers over sins. It's a reference, again, to water that covered the Egyptians in Psalm 78, verse 53. When they're coming out of Egypt, the children of Israel, they get up to the Red Sea, and the waters part, and they go across, and then they get in the middle, and then the waters come in and close and kill all the Egyptians. There's a beautiful scene in the Bible Museum when you're going through the story of the Old Testament where you walk through the divided waters and then into the next room where it talks about what happened after that. It's really pretty incredible and fun to go through. And that's the imagery here. Water covering the earth in the flood, water covering the Egyptians after the Red Sea. Here it means to conceal something or to hide something. And in this case, the covering refers to sins. This is what the psalmist says God does. I want you to stop for a moment, and I want you to look over at Psalm 85. Remember, this word love is God's love for Israel, and it's also used in relationships what people have with each other. In Psalm 85, verse 1, Lord, you have been favorable unto your land. You have brought back the captivity of Jacob. You have forgiven the iniquity of your people. You have covered all their sin. Do you see that in verse 2? You have covered all their sin. This is what God does. God forgives and forbears the sins of his people. He forgives and forbears. He covers it. He hides it. The proverb, going back to Proverbs chapter 10, refers to the one who loves, covering and hiding the sin of the one who's loved. And it doesn't mean that we should hide our sin. Proverbs 28:13 says whoever conceals his sin won't prosper. It doesn't mean that we should hide our sin. Well, if people love me, hide my sin, then maybe it's okay for me to hide my sin too. That's not what Solomon is saying. Whoever confesses and forsakes his sin, that's the person who prospers. But what he's saying here is that those who love cover over other people's faults. In fact, if you're back in Proverbs, look over at chapter 11 and go down to verse 13. A talebearer reveals secrets, but he that is of a faithful spirit conceals the matter. He keeps it private. He hides it. He doesn't make it open. He doesn't bring it out into public view. This is what love does. Love says nobody else needs to know about this. Love deals with things biblically, but always with the idea of trying to help the other person grow spiritually, not to embarrass that person, not to put that person down, not to divide from that person. It's always for that person's benefit, always for that person's growth. And so he says, love covers over sins. If you love a person, it says, you forbear and forgive their faults. Now, where else can you find faults but in a Christian home? Or in a house of any kind? Where else can you find faults? I mean, if you want to really get to know yourself, you just ask the people living with you all about who you are. If they're willing to be honest with you, it can be a little bit scary. It can be a little bit troubling. I mean, they know you, right? Your wife, your husband, your children, they know you. They know all the mistakes you've made. They know all the times you failed. In fact, they probably can recount them to you if you really wanted, just like running off a grocery list. I hesitate to say this because my dad listens to these on Monday morning, so he'll forgive me He's on usually on the treadmill when he's listening to these, and so this will probably get his heart racing just the tiniest bit. But he's on blood pressure medicine, so he should be okay. The meds will help, pacemaker, all that. But when I was younger, I used to kind of keep a running tally in the back of my mind how my parents had treated my brothers and my sister versus how they had treated me. I just kept this kind of running tally. And I would remember all of the times that they had wronged me, my brothers and sisters, and my parents just said it was okay. They just kind of let it go. And I remembered all the times when I wronged them and they didn't let it go. Now, I'll just tell you in that, I didn't remember every time I wronged my brothers and sister. I didn't remember that. I just remembered the ones that were to my own advantage. You understand how this goes? And I remember once when I was kind of recounting this for my parents as a sort of present. It's like a cat bringing a rat to the family. Look what I brought you. I was bringing to them my rat of recounted wrongs and saying, here is how I've been wronged in this home, and was doing all this. And my mother looked at me, and with great wisdom, she said, well, I hope someday you'll be a better parent. And I, at the time, I just thought, well, I probably will be, How can I not? Do I need to go back through this again? Can I give you the litany again? This great oratory that I have? However, I have learned since then exactly what she meant. Because truth be told, if my family wanted to reveal to you every flaw that I have, they'd be happy to do so. I mean, sometimes they do it anyway, even without you asking. Back when I got kidney stones, the first time I had them, at one point I was in so much pain. I wasn't going to the hospital. I wasn't going to go to the doctor. I didn't have any wisdom regarding these back then. Now, the first little pain in my back, boom, I'm gone. I know what I need. I'm getting those meds. I'm going to be fine, but it's painful, okay? But at one point, I was on the ground in our living room. I was on the ground howling like a wolf to the moon. And after the kidney stone pain passed, my son decided to act this out for me. This is what you look like, Dad. This is what you look like. And I'm going, thanks. And I'm reminded of my mother. Someday you'll be a better parent. My children, my wife, they could pull all together. They could consult with one another and come up with a top 10 list of all the ways I failed. It wouldn't be that difficult because they know me. Do you know what love does? It just crumples up the list and throws it away. It just throws it away. It says, this isn't what I need in my family. And I'm telling you, folks, what you need to do right now is crumple up that list. Husbands, if you have a list against your wife, you need to crumple it up and throw it away. Of times when she's wronged you or said something that embarrassed you or sometimes hurt your feelings or your fragile male ego, you need to crumple up that list and throw it away. Ladies, you need to do the same for your husband. You need to forget all those times when he missed something that was important to you, all those times when he said something that slighted you or that cut into your heart. You need to set them aside. You need to let love cover over those failings. Young people, you need to listen to me. Your mom and dad love you. You need to throw away whatever list you've just started writing in your heart against your parents. You need to throw it away. You need to let love cover over those things. Are they perfect? No, but I'm telling you, you won't be either. And the last thing you want are your kids someday doing the same to you that you are doing to your mom and dad. You need to let love cover over those things. You need to crumple up the list and throw it away. And I'll tell you something. You may never be close to your brothers or sisters. If you have siblings in your home, you may never be super close to them going forward in life. But I sure hope you have some sort of relationship with them where you can see them and be glad to see your brothers or sisters or however your house is established. But if you're creating a list, listen to me, young people, if you're creating a list against your brother, your sister, your siblings, and you're harboring in your heart bitterness toward the other people that God has placed in your home, you are dividing that house. You are. And you need to stop doing that, and you need to throw all that away. And just say, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to hate my sister. I'm not going to hate my brother. Again, however God has established your home. Grandparents, you're not off the hook either. You have so much influence in your family. You're the patriarch, you're the matriarch of your home. You're the one that your children still look up to and listen to for advice and counsel from time to time. They may not say it. They may not ask directly, but they do. And if you are harboring a list against your children, even as they're raising your grandchildren, you need to crumple up that list and throw it away. You need to show love to your adult children. You need to show love to their children. And that may be difficult because they may be rearing those kids in a way that you wouldn't do it. They're doing things that you wouldn't do. But you need to crumple up the list and throw it away. Now, I probably won't ever really truly forget that when my brother kicked his soccer ball that I brought to a picnic over the fence and it was lost and he blamed me and I had to give him my soccer ball. Okay, there's one of the things that was on my list. I may never forget that. But can I tell you something? I don't care anymore. I just don't care. And it's not because I'm almost 50 years old and it happened when I was 10. It's not like that at all. Because I meet people all the time who are still harboring grudges from when they were 10. It's just I don't care. My parents did the very best they could with the information they had. I believe that. I trust them. I love them. I know they did. I don't care anymore. I don't care. You just crumple up the list and throw it away. Because hatred will divide your family. Love, it's the glue that holds it all together. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for your word.